Well, welcome to week one, practical applications of risk management in public safety operations. I want to start off briefly by providing some introductions for folks here. So instead of me laying this out tonight, I'm going to have each of the participants talk a little bit about who they are and what their perspectives are, and then we'll move on to the core discussion itself. Having said that, let's go over to Michelle.
Everyone, I'm delighted to be here the second time around the sun. I'm a strategic advisor to companies and governments. I work on risk. My central goal is to help people to do better, to deal with the big, obvious, scary thing that's coming straight at them, the gray rhino in their face. My first experience with risk was many years ago when I was writing about financial markets and sovereign credit risk and financial crisis, which is where I started seeing these obvious things coming that weren't being dealt with when everybody knew that they needed to be. And that turned into eventually running an organization, a think tank in New York. So a lot of experience with organizational risk and other broader policy risks. I've also done a number of workshops with first responders where my work is used quite extensively. And I just love to see these ideas on risk management to be put into practice in real life, which is why I am so glad to be back here with you guys.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Michelle. Look forward to following through as we move through the session. Gordon, would you like to introduce?
Well, first and foremost, it's an honor to be associated with the University of Virginia, this Master of Public Safety program. My hat's off to you for coming into this program and choosing this as an elective. It's an absolute honor for me to work with Michelle Wucker. She is seriously a stone cold genius, and I am just so grateful to have her advice and counsel on these issues involving risk management. With respect to me, for those of you I've never met, I had a 33-year career with the California Highway Patrol, 10 years as a motorcycle cop, 10 years as a sergeant supervising motorcycle cops. And through a series of flukes, I ended up at headquarters in 1992. And my big claim to fame is I helped build an Office of General Counsel for the CHP, and most importantly to me, an Office of Risk Management. I'm very proud to tell you that the CHP was the first major law enforcement agency in America to have a dedicated Office of Risk Management, and even more important to me, on the same level as the organizational chart as the Office of General Counsel. The lawyers will fix our problems after they occur. The whole risk management bent is what can we do up front? This class is called Practical Applications of Risk Management. And Michelle and I both have the same goal, to give you some proven strategies and tactics that you can take back to your respective organization with the ultimate goal of better protecting yourself, your team, your organization, your respective communities, and of course, a big one for me on a national level is better protecting our great nation. This is an 8-week program. There's going to be a lot of very interesting readings. Please keep up with the readings. Some assignments, please keep up with the assignments. But if you work hard on this program, you'll leave with stuff that will really benefit you and your agency. Jay, back to you.
All right. And just to give everybody a little bit of sense in myself, my name's Jay Farr. I am going to be just hosting this for this week. My background is criminal justice, law enforcement for about 40 years, retired as a chief of police in Arlington, plus spent some time in the military and the Marine Corps and a little time as a federal agent. So a little bit of a broad background and have some sense of some of the things that we're going to be talking about for the next few weeks. That being said, let me give you just a quick overview of the big things for this course. So in this course, you're going to learn to identify risks theoretically and practically in every job description in your respective public safety. It's going to cover your entirety of your agency. At the end of the 8 weeks, you should be able to be familiar with the following concepts related to risk management. First, understand and apply the breadth and depth of real risk management, which we'll get into as we go through the course. Identify, analyze problems lying in wait. Be able to understand and demonstrate the skills needed to build viable control measures. Design risk mitigation measures to improve the quality of your operation. And lastly, explain and demonstrate risk prediction and prevention techniques. That gives you sort of a really broad overview of what we're going to do over the 8-week period. But for tonight's class, there's a couple key areas I'd like to focus on. First, understanding what causes tragedies. proximate cause versus problems lying in wait. Gordon will address that in a little bit. We want to start the conversation about risk assessment, probabilistic or actuarial. Learn the value of studying post-tragedies inside and outside your profession. Discuss and explore the value of systems and their design, update, and implementations. And you'll hear a lot about systems and the impact they have. And you'll be introduced to the 10 families of risk and begin the conversation about identifying and preparing to handle the most significant risks in each family. And lastly, start to develop your understanding of how to build control measures to address these identified risks. So that being said, let's get into a discussion with both Michelle and Gordon. I'm going to put the first one to Gordon to talk about proximate cause versus real problems lying in wait. Gordon?
If you've been to any of my live programs, or if you've watched any of my stuff online, I always like to talk about tragedy Titanic. Wherever I go in the world, everybody knows Titanic. You go to Dubai, they know Titanic. You go to Tokyo, they know Titanic. You go to Helsinki, they know Titanic. I'm talking to you, you know Titanic. 112 years ago, 1,500 people ended up dead. By any definition, that's a tragedy. So what caused it? You walk up to 100 Americans and ask them what caused tragedy Titanic, and everybody wants to focus on the iceberg. Ship hit the iceberg, the ship went down, therefore the iceberg had to be the cause. It always troubles me that when tragedies occur, people look for the event that instantly preceded the tragedy and want to place the blame there. Real risk managers like to go back in time and ask this question. Okay, it hit the iceberg, but were there related causes? Were there proximate causes? Were there contributing causes? Were there problems lying in wait that everybody knew about and nobody did a darn thing about it? And when you study tragedies, and that's what risk managers do, studying past tragedies, and you look for cause, these things have happened before. I'll let Michelle spend this very, very, very vividly. She's the genius on this. But black swans versus gray rhinos. The black swan, the unknown, the gray rhino, as Michelle wrote in her book, The Gray Rhino, and her newest book, which is part of your reading here, You Are What You Risk. You know, my opinion is there's very few black swans in our world. Our tragedies, our injuries, our deaths, our indictments, our loss of public trust, our lawsuits, the criminal issues we face, these things are not sneaking up on us. You know, we can see them coming and we refuse to get out of the way. Why we refuse to get out of the way, we'll talk about later on in the program, but that's the difference between proximate cause and the real problems lying in wait. Your assignment is to identify these real problems lying in wait in each of these 10 families of risk and put together viable control measures to address these issues proactively. Michelle, I know you've got something else to add there. That was my brief overview. Please get involved here.
Great. And thank you so much for your kind words. I think everyone probably saw my head getting bigger and bigger and bigger on the screen. And I always tell people I'm just so honored to be co-teaching this course with the coolest retired CHIPS cop ever, who was actually an extra in CHIPS back in the day. And really what a pleasure it is working with Jay and everybody here in the program. So thank you. So gray rhinos is a term that I came up with based on my work in sovereign debt crisis. Based on Argentina, I was sort of in the front lines writing about their debt crisis as it was unfolding. Everybody could see it coming. There were proposals to stop it that got turned away. And then 10 years later, the same thing was happening with Greece. And I wrote an influential policy paper that helped to catalyze the discussion that got Greece and its creditors to agree to a workable restructuring, a smooth restructuring, because if it hadn't happened, the whole euro would have gone down. We would have had an even worse financial crisis than we already had. So my work comes out of finance, not so much directly out of public safety. But since the Gray Rhino came out, I've done a lot of work there. And so the question for me, when I was thinking about the difference between Argentina and Greece, why did one of them see the big scary thing coming and deal with it, and the other one didn't? I wanted to talk about it in a way that was much more accessible. And we'll talk a little bit later in the course about communication strategies as part of risk management. And I realized that not everybody would geek out on sovereign debt theory the way I did, and I wanted an accessible term. But I was talking to a friend. I said, "The big scary thing coming at you. It's a big, rhino, horn rhino, and it's gray, unlike the black swan, which is black because Europeans who went to Australia saw black swans for the first time, and they'd never been able to conceive of a black swan before because their imagination was just on the white ones. My use of color is a little bit different. If you go to the zoo with a 5-year-old, you ask the kid what color the rhino in front of them is, they will say the really obvious thing, which is that it's gray. But then the grown-ups will say, oh no, look at that sign there. This is a black rhino. This is a white rhino, which are the formal names of those two species, but they actually don't describe the color. So that part of the metaphor is a reminder that we're not as good as we'd like to think we are at dealing with the obvious things right in front of us. It's a distant cousin, not just to the black swan, but to the elephant in the room, which by definition, nobody does or says anything about. It drives me crazy if someone tries to talk about the rhino in the room, because the rhino is not in the room. The rhino is on the road right in front of you. It's got space and it's going to run and come at you. And it's a thing that people are talking about. Some people are doing something, others aren't. And my work, and hopefully what we'll achieve during the next 8 weeks, is for you to become the people who see the big thing coming and do something about it, as opposed to sitting still. And we're going to talk in a minute about some of the 10 families of risk, which Gordon has developed, and helping you to understand those and how to respond. But I wanted to make just 3 big points about why we're so bad at dealing with these gray rhinos. And the first has to do with often organizational design or structural issues. There's no political will at the top. There's not enough resources. These are the kinds of things I call meta gray rhinos, which are systemic problems that get in the way of solving the right problem. And one of the biggest meta gray rhinos there is out there is but we've always done this way gray rhino. And hopefully you will all have the tools to overcome that. And the second involves cognitive barriers and biases. And over the last 2-3 decades, you've heard a lot more about this in the business and finance worlds. That is that people are not as rational as they'd like to think, as we'd like to think we are. And there are biases that get in the way, that keep us from dealing with things. If you think about the 5 stages of grief, the first one is denial. It's a defense mechanism, because sometimes things feel so big and unmanageable that you would just collapse if you accepted it all at once. And the goal is to not stay in denial any longer than you need to. And so we'll talk a little bit more about some of those gremlins. And the final thing is decision making, and particularly in groups and organizations. That if you think those little gremlins are dangerous when they're in one person's brain, when you get a bunch of people together, they get to be like that whole movie, The Gremlins, the whole pack of them running around and getting in the way of making the right decisions. So we're going to help you to understand some of those better, and in particular, what you can do to be aware and to respond and to counteract the little tiny gremlins and the big scary gray rhinos. So back to you, Gordon.
Well, you summed it up beautifully. And again, in my world, and I'm hoping you agree with me, that there's very few things that are sneaking up on us. Our tragedies are just so darn obvious, and it's maddening to me that we keep on making the same mistakes over and over and over again. And you, as all the people in this class, the leaders of public safety, you've got to go back and tell people there's things you can do up front to prevent these problems from occurring. I just presented today to the in Portland, Oregon, to the Northwest Leadership Council, and a good half of the 800 people were women in the audience. And I made a comment that 54 years ago, how many women would have been in this audience? And that's when they started this Northwest Leadership, probably slim and none. And I said, when I joined law enforcement in 1973, there was very few women. By 83, more and more women were showing up. And by 85, we had all these issues involving sex harassment. And I was active on the lecture circuit back in '85, and I put together a class entitled Sex Harassment Techniques for Elimination. And it was a 4-hour block, and I taught it the same way for 10 years. In 1995, I had a brilliant idea. I've got a new way to teach my sex harassment class. And I tried it the new way for about 2 months, and I got in so much trouble for doing it the new way, I had to go back and do it the old way. So I don't do it the new way anymore. But I'll tell you what I did for a couple months. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I've got you for 4 hours on sex harassment techniques for elimination. Let's get started. And I would reach into my briefcase and pull out a stack of 3x5 cards, and I would walk through the audience, handing them out at random. I'm going to hand these out at random. One for you, two over here, one over here. And you'd hear people talking. This is not random. He's just giving it to the women. And I get back up front. Ladies, y'all have a 3x5 card. Would you please take a look around the room and using that 3x5 card, write down the name of the biggest sexual predator in this room right now. And by the way, if you're going to do that, you get your cash up front because they are not going to pay you after the fact. And I'd go around and pick up the cards, and I only did this for 2 months. But in every stack of cards, there was a name that was repeated time and time again. And I'd hold them up to the chief. And I'd say, Chief, I'll sell you these cards for $50,000. And you could see him thinking, well, we can take it out of asset seizure and forfeiture money. And I would tear the cards up in front of him and throw them in the trash. And I'd say, my guess is you don't need to buy them. My guess is what? You already know. When was the last time a sex harassment lawsuit was filed against any organization where people sat around after the fact and said, wow, who would have ever thunk? Most of the time, people are saying, that's been going on for years. Everybody knew, and nobody did a darn thing about it. Every cop knows who the next cop is who's going to get an excessive force complaint. Every cop knows who the next cop is who's going to wreck a car. Every firefighter knows who the next guy is who's going to get hurt freelancing when he's not doing something right. Why aren't we addressing this? Well, Margaret Heffernan is one of my favorite authors, and she's got a great book called Willful Blindness, and she sums it up in chapter 1. Why don't people raise their hand and address these problems lying in wait? And her answer, in too many organizations, if you raise your hand and say, we have a problem, in the eyes of many people in the organization, you're the problem. So don't raise your hand. And this is particularly acute in government operations, and you are a government operation. Because if you raise your hand and take that risk, you get paid X. If you don't do jack and ignore the risk, you get paid X. So why raise your hand? And as a result, mediocrity has replaced accountability. And ladies and gentlemen, the whole house of cards has fallen apart. We've got these problems lying in wait that everybody knows, and nobody's doing a darn thing about it. And I don't want to beat this to death, but I've got 8 weeks along with Michelle to open your eyes on how to identify these problems lying in wait and then build these viable control measures to address things proactively. Why do we keep on getting in trouble on use of force? Why do we keep on getting in trouble in pursuits? Why do we keep on getting in trouble for inappropriate behavior in the workplace? These things are obvious problems with obvious solutions. That's your mission, to go back and do something about this stuff. Michelle, I hope I sort of covered that.
Absolutely, very, very much so. And, it's the getting the people who are stakeholders in this to act that is so important, whether it's the person above you, the people out on the street. There's all sorts of stakeholders. There are also stakeholders that organizations don't always necessarily think about, and that's the people in the communities, the civic organizations, the businesses, the people who live in high crime areas or who are near rivers that flood, things like that. And so one of the things that we will be doing as you develop your risk assessment, your plan for dealing it, is spending some time thinking about your stakeholder network and how you can move them forward to get them on board with the obvious things that, I hope that your minds are doing what I think that they're doing, which is starting to say, oh yeah, there's this and this and this and this and this. These are happening all the time. So it's a matter of how to motivate people and organizations. It's a matter of how to create the right incentives and also the right governance structure. So lots and lots of problems that we know are there, but it's a mystery, and it's not such a mystery why we don't deal with them. So, Gordon, you've broken these down into 10 groups, which makes it a lot easier for people to sort of sort out and think through things. And one of your assignments will be to go through each of these groups and pick the top one in each. You pick the top three and then pick the top one. So Gordon's got a great overview for you of what these 10 families are and what you might encounter.
If I could jump into that very quickly, when I started the lecture series in 1980, smart people were coming up to me saying, Gordon, I love what you're saying, but where do we get started? We face thousands and thousands of risks. Where do we get started? And I didn't have the answer. And the question kept on coming up throughout the 80s and the early 90s. In the mid 90s, I put together a program called the 10 Families of Risk. What I've tried to do is take all of the risks we face and put them into 10 families in no particular order. There are external risks, legal and regulatory risks, strategic risks, organizational risks, operational risks, information risks, HR risks, technology risks, financial and reputational risks, political risks. And throughout the course, you're going to hear these in a different order because we wanted to make sure they were complementary to the readings you're going to have. But your job is to identify what are the great risks we face here and how do we build these control measures. We'll talk about a technique called 5-4-3-2-1-0. When you're looking to build viable policies, give me 5 people who actually have to do the job. 4 supervisors, 3 managers, 2 executives, 1 risk manager, and 0 lawyers. Keep the lawyers out of the derivation process. They're great at reviewing things, but if they're involved in the derivation, it's going to take forever to get things done. Once you have that system put into place on how to build these control measures, here's the big battle you're going to face. As I mentioned, it's an absolute honor to be associated with University of Virginia. But another place that I'm proud to teach at is the Naval Postgraduate School. And my favorite program there is their Emergence program. And these are the best and the brightest young people in our respective professions who have ideas. And they teach them for several weeks on how to generate these ideas and perfect these ideas and have an idea what to do. I'm the Friday morning speaker, and I'm doing this on March 22nd. I'm the Friday morning speaker, and I've got 3 hours to say, you've worked very hard to build these things. Let me tell you exactly what's going to happen when you get back to work. This won't work. We've never done it this way. Do you have any idea how much it will cost? How do you know a program like this is going to work? People will put these things, and Michelle and I are going to give you some, what I'd like to say, strategies and tactics rather than workarounds on how to get that rabbi, to get that interested party, to get that stakeholder believing what you say, and how to make that stuff work. This is so much fun putting this together. I love reading the final papers because you go from a blank sheet to a beautiful final paper and go back and implement that in your agency. And that's what it's all about.
Yep, absolutely. It's going to be a fantastic journey. And what's great about this is Gordon has these amazing stories from the field, and he's such a great storyteller. So he'll be able to go give those real life examples. And the examples I have tend to be more on the organizational side, on the psychological side. I'll also share with you a 5-stage framework for thinking about where you and your organization and your peers are in dealing with the gray rhino in front of you, and then to transfer that to your stakeholder analysis. And those are laid out in the Gray Rhino, which is just on the suggested reading list for this class. But You Are What You Risk, which is the sequel to the Gray Rhino, is the one that we've assigned because that helps you to understand a growing area in risk management, which is the behavioral side, to understand what you and everyone around you is bringing to a Gray Rhino situation. And so we're very, very much looking forward to working with you on that. And you will love Gordon's stories. I'm more the nerdy side of things.
Well, Michelle, we both read the piece of the San Francisco Chronicle about pursuits on a national level and all the problems. And then I followed this up by sending you a videotape of a pit maneuver, and I forget exactly where it was, but a pit maneuver not at 30 miles an hour or 40 miles an hour, but 109 miles an hour. This cop pits this guy. His push bar gets stuck on the bumper, And this poor cop went for the ride of his life. Jay and I were talking about this earlier. As he was vaulting over this car, I could just imagine him saying, "This is not working out the way I thought it was going to work out." You know, this is not sneaking up on anybody. Fortunately, nobody died in this, but it could have very well had that. And a lot of these things have ended up in death. Again, that same mistake over and over and over again. How do we get sued, hurt, indicted, fired, losing public trust? They're not sneaking up on us. They're not sneaking up on us. So pay attention, keep up with your readings, and you can change the world in your organization.
Absolutely. And these examples are so good to learn from. They're from the real world. I'll bring in some examples from the policy and from the business world, which will be a little bit different context, but I think it's really important to look at those and to understand those, partly because there's been just so much effort and brain power and energy put into understanding some of those dynamics, but also because it's often easier to see a problem when it's not so close to you. You know, you look at another country, another organization, another situation, and you go, you know what, that actually applies to me. And so listening to some other stories about what has worked and what hasn't worked will be really good for you. And I get the question all the time from reporters, and it drives me bonkers because they say, was COVID-19 a gray rhino or a black swan? You know, was the Suez Canal crisis where the ship got stuck a gray rhino or a black swan? They always want to look in the past, and you can only see black swans in the past, but you can see gray rhinos in front of you. It's very much meant as a forward-looking concept. But I finally just kind of read the writing on the wall and gave in. I said, okay, people want to hear about something in the past. I always preface it with forward-looking context, but there are times when you look and say, here's what happened with these bank failures. You know, here's what happened with this bridge collapse. This is where things went wrong, and this is what you can apply to the problems that are in front of you. So we're hoping to give you a very good mix of both theory and examples and case studies and practical applications and tools so that the past examples we're giving to you do not become your future.
Jay, what do you think?
Well, I think you answered most of the questions I was going to ask. So you guys are very much on a roll. So Michelle, one of the things you just talked about, and it was a question specifically, you know, you talk about people wanting to learn from the past, but there is, I'm assuming there is a real value to studying past tragedies, and it both inside and outside of your profession. And I believe over the next few weeks, you plan to have a few case studies included in the course and some thoughts about how to integrate those into the learning assignment for the students.
Absolutely. We'll have a short description of a situation and a question. Okay, you know, you are the head of the agency, you know, you are out in the field. How are you going to respond to this and why? And Gordon will be able to come back and tell you this is how it happened in real life. And hopefully you will have come up with better decisions than the people in the real life situation did. Although we'll have some good ones as well as bad ones. And I want to make one more point, which is that there's a tool that I love using called the pre-mortem. We will be looking at a lot of post-mortems, but one of the scenario planning exercises that risk managers use is to say, it's 2040 and your organization has just gone under, your company has gone under, some big crisis has happened. Take us backwards and tell us all the steps that led up to that terrible thing happening. So that sort of scenario thinking, you can build on other examples to get there, but it's an absolutely fantastic tool for putting yourself in the shoes of people who are in that situation. Hopefully it's not you in the future. And it's similar to a tool used in national security. Some of the scenario analysis, so war games, simulations, tabletop exercises that help you to kind of prepare for something, build a muscle for dealing with that particular risk before it really happens. So if you do that when you're in a calm state, you're more likely to internalize it so that when there's something bearing down on top of you, you will be able to use that muscle memory to respond more effectively to it.
I was honored this week, Michelle, to have a long conversation with a former executive at Boeing. And he was telling me everything that led up to these current problems that they're having. You know, it was just a series of bad decisions and nobody addressed it. Everybody knew there was a problem, but they just kept on adding on and adding on, and look at the fix they're in now. It's that pre-mortem would have been so valuable to them.
Absolutely. Even now, I've been following all the things that are happening and following a discussion on LinkedIn when somebody made a post with a comment about how the problem was culture. And some know-it-all who hadn't done his homework retorted, it was engineering. It wasn't culture. And, it's the culture that led to the shift from engineering to nickel and diming. And it's interesting. You've probably heard that old business maxim, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so Boeing, again, it's a great example of how something from the private sector is a really relevant example for public safety agencies to look at, because you can see some of the places where the culture broke down and where some of almost the scripts that people follow, this is how we do it sort of script, can get in the way of fixing something that's obvious and screaming for attention, like tightening screws properly.
And it's funny you mentioned that, because Mercedes-Benz refused to put cup holders in their cars. You drive, it is not where you drink. And BMW put cup holders in their cars, and they were closing the gap on sales. And the engineers who said, no, 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 never are we going to have cup holders, they had to give in to the salespeople because it was a revenue issue all of a sudden. And every engineer knew, you start drinking and driving and distracted and all these things, something bad's going to happen. And it has happened. And the engineers saying, I told you so. So the culture will chew up that thing in a heartbeat.
Absolutely. And it's not just the cup holders anymore. It's the little things that you put your cell phone on and you can, play games while they're driving, which is just blows my mind.
Of course, we do need a 54-inch screen there now, so we can monitor everything that's going on, keep an eye on it.
It seems there's a lot of distractions there, Michelle, a lot of distractions. I do remember,
that's not even counting like the kids screaming in the back seat and the, the teenagers fighting over who's going to play what music.
Well, it's good to know we got our focus on what matters. So I think you have both given a really good, quick 25 minutes of what's to come. And there is a lot to come in the next few weeks, no doubt. But as I go through this, I wanted to give just a couple thoughts for the students here as we move forward, and then some closing thoughts from each of you. So if I was sitting out in your class right now, I'd say, well, how will this course help you identify and prepare to handle the most significant risks for each of these families and build control measures? Okay, certainly that you'd want to be thinking about. And to that point, I think number one, you will have a better understanding of real risk management by the end of the 8 weeks. Two, you'll learn to identify and analyze problems lying in wait. As Michelle said, it's the ones lying in wait that get you. It's not what's already happened, it's what's coming towards you. Through the risk management proposal, you'll demonstrate the skills needed to build a viable control measures for your agency. And I think the focus of this course is really to build that risk management proposal. And Gordon will get in a lot more detail as to each of the families, and Michelle will provide a lot more detail on how to get there. But in the end of the day, you're going to build a document that you can take to your agency and put into action, which I think is probably one of the best things about this course. You'll also design a risk mitigation measures to help you improve the quality of your operations, and ultimately explain and demonstrate risk prediction and prevention techniques. And I say this, that you're going to be demonstrating it to not just the class, but to your command staff and to your peers. And it's something that I know Gordon really strives to make a useful tool, as does Michelle. So that's what's coming for you in the next few weeks. And so what I would ask, any final thoughts? I'll start with Michelle as we close out the first week. Michelle?
Yeah, well, and as I said, it's so exciting to be sharing ideas that get put into real life right away. We're planning in the last session to talk a little bit more about the sort of communications strategies and ways to help make sure that you are communicating in a way that the people who need to push the green button go think about it. And a final point on that before we get into the meat of the class is that a lot of people think about risk as just something negative, the potential that something could go wrong, the potential of loss. And, if you don't do this, then this bad thing's going to happen. But there actually are lots of positive sides. Risk is actually a choice. It's a choice. It's a decision. We make 35,000 choices a day. We take 35,000 risks a day. And so one of the things we're hoping to do is to help you to communicate the benefit to your agency or organization of some of the little steps that are easy to do. Sometimes there are big steps that are a little harder to do. But this isn't just about avoiding bad things happening. It's about participating in a movement to get more good things to happen, to make it easier to do your jobs and not just keep putting out fires all the time, literally or figuratively.
Thank you, Michelle. Gordon, any final thoughts?
Well, if you recall when you started your public safety job, for many of you, it was your first big girl job or big boy job. And you're out there working and doing everything. And around April 12th, somebody says to you, have you got your taxes done yet? And you say, what? You've been going to school, you haven't been paying any taxes. So you scramble to put your taxes together before April 15th, the deadline. And I got to tell you, that product you first generated was garbage. You missed a lot of good deductions. You missed a lot of things. You might have crossed the line on a couple things. Over a period of years, you learn, you know what? It's easier to do it every day through Quicken and then just print it out at the end of the year. Same is true with this class. Keep up with the ratings, please. Keep up with the assignments, please. Don't think, well, I'll get caught up. It will snowball on you, and all of a sudden it's unmanageable, and you won't be happy. And you're not going to like Michelle. You're not going to like me. Oh, they're giving us too much work. It has been designed to make it easy to do if you keep up with the assignments. So the reading assignments, the weekly assignments we give you, we really went out of our way to not overburden you because we know you're full-time moms, you're full-time dads, you got a full-time job. We want you to really be successful in this program, but it's up to you to keep up with the assignments as we go forward.
All right. Thanks, Gordon. And that being said, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to review this week's mini lecture. As Gordon said, it is one of those kind of courses that require you to stay on top of it each week, but if you do, it is certainly manageable. I would expect to see everybody at the mini lecture later in the week, and during that time, you'll expect that we'll get in a little more detail into each one of these topics. So thank you again. Thank you, Gordon, and thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Jay.
See you on Tuesday.
All right. Good night.